When you build large-scale applications, those applications are typically going to be built across multiple virtual machines, whether it's directly where you're working with infrastructure as a service and you're creating your virtual machines, or even if you're working with web applications or cloud services where you're not really working directly with the underlying virtual machines, but they're still there. They still need to be there to run whatever your workload is. With virtual networks, you have the ability to stitch these together. Whether it is just all virtual machines you're creating and you need those virtual machines to create, and maybe you need different groups of virtual machines to be able to communicate directly and possibly some externally and possibly some not externally. Whether you have to have your Azure environment and Azure workload able to connect directly to your on-premises environment and have effectively local communications between those. These are all capabilities that are brought with virtual networks. And by the way, I can also take certain web applications and plug those in. I can also take cloud services and plug those into virtual networks as well. So I have a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of the way that I set up communication within my Azure environment using virtual networks. Let's talk about some of the features that are available within the virtual networks. So first of all, you create a virtual network and you specify a region. Now, it's not recommended that you specify affinity groups anymore. Those are actually obsolete and they're actually being scaled out, and there's a lot of things you can't use them anymore for, so don't even worry about it. Stay away from affinity groups, easy enough. But I can create a virtual network in a region, and then I can easily communicate within that region. All right. I can also associate virtual network with DNS servers. So there's going to be a built-in Azure DNS server, but I can also use external DNS servers. I can also use internal DNS servers. So if, for example, I was setting up a virtual network where I was extending my on-premise environment and I wanted to use Active Directory servers in the virtual network itself, you can actually do that. So a lot of flexibility in how you do that. Virtual networks can be divided into subnets. You would use those subnets, for example, if you wanted to have different communication rules between different subnets. Maybe I have a public subnet and an internal subnet, and I have different rules for communicating with external applications and clients depending on which subnet I'm using. Have the ability to do that. You also have point-to-site and site-to-site connections. Point-to-site connection is essentially a VPN connection that's built into the virtual network capability within the Azure environment. You also have what's called site-to-site connectivity, and that's where I actually can set up a connectivity between my entire virtual network and, let's say, my entire on-premise network. So my Azure environment becomes local to my on-premise environment. That can be very powerful if you are, for example, migrating workloads out of the on-premise into the Azure environment, but you're not moving everything at once, and you still need that connectivity and that communication between your on-premise environment and your Azure environment. Very powerful capability for me, from my perspective. Now also, when you create virtual machines are going to be created typically as part of a virtual network. We're going to talk in a little bit about different versions of Azure. There's Azure version 1 and there's Azure version 2. In Azure version 1, you can put your virtual machines in a virtual network. In Azure version 2, you always put your virtual machines in a virtual network. I try to work in version 2 almost exclusively. There's still a few things that are only available in version 1. Again, we'll get to the different versions of Azure in just a little bit, but this is the idea of virtual networks. It gives you that framework for communication, very controllable, but still very easy to set up. You're not running wires, you're not setting up physical networking devices, switches, routers, etc. You're using a virtualized network environment, which is going to be easy to set up, but again, still give you that high level of control over the way that your machines are communicating with each other.